Seems such a long time ago since I last trapped moths. And it was here at Gamston Wood on February the 4th. It's now the 22nd of February. Very windy at times, 22nd of February. We need to find somewhere sheltered, which could just be up there. But more than likely it'll be more or less in the same place as when I trapped here on that rather cool early February evening. But much better temperatures this evening despite the breeze. We should catch more than just pale brindle beauties and a single chestnut tonight. Well, I think I've settled on somewhere that should be suitable and hopefully as wind-free as possible. It's not blowing a gale all the time, but one thing when you're moth trapping, you don't really want problems with wind from any direction. We should be sheltered enough here, but I don't think we'll get away without it totally. And hopefully it won't stop the moths from flying. It shouldn't do. Sometimes it just sweeps them straight across in front of the light and off into the black beyond. Talking of which, we need to get set up and sorted out in readiness. As the train goes past, the bulb is slowly starting to brighten up. Takes about a minute or so, gradually becoming brighter, then all of a sudden it brightens quite noticeably and quickly. So they're going to give it a couple of hours this evening, just play it by ear, so to speak, and see what turns up. Hopefully we'll get one or two moths along the way. But right now, first thing in order, now we've switched on and got the light running, here's a cup of tea. Well, we do have a moth in already, and like last time, it's another chestnut. So you can often tell chestnuts by the shininess to the wings, which does show up in this particular shot, but you have to get it at a certain angle. And as I said before, this is usually one of the very first moths that could come to light on an evening. They spend the day in the leaf litter, and as dusk approaches, out they come. Very attractive moth, quite variable at times when fresh, but post the worst of the winter, they generally look like this chap here. But at least we have a moth. Well, we're not long into the trapping session and the sky has darkened considerably now, and apart from the moon is totally dark. It's still blowing quite strongly through the tops of the trees, but at ground level here so far it's been okay. I thought that the sheet might be blowing all over the place, but it hasn't. And moths are starting to come in too. At the moment we've got most of the early spring species in that you would expect. Species like common quaker and Hebrew character, single marsh moth is knocking around, and there's a couple of pale brindle beauties too. So things are quite promising. Just hope the temperature doesn't drop down too much. The sky is clear at the moment, But the breeze, the one good thing about the breeze is that that will keep that temperature up just a little bit. So let's see what turns up. Well, here's one of a small number of common quakers which are in and around the light, and this is very typical of what you get with most common quakers. Occasionally you can get some that are better marked than this, but generally it's a brownish moth, and the most obvious features are that line that you can see going across the forewings, but also there's the kidney mark, and they're outlined in like a cream colour. Now on some specimens that can be a brighter outline, but this is typical of what you'll get with what is a very common early spring moth. Nice to get a number of these, no matter how common they are. So that's common quaker, and I think we're up to about 5 or 6 of those around the light now. I'm just about to have a count up, but this is a typically marked pale brindled beauty. You can see just how feathered the antennae are on these moths, beautifully feathered. The females, of course, are wingless. Occasionally you can find them resting on the trunks of trees during the day. It's a long time since I've seen female pale brindled beauty. As I mentioned before, this is one of my favourite spring moths, but there again, I tend to like anything that really is brave enough and hard enough to fly in the colder months of the year. And here's an old favourite from many years of trapping early in the year. This is a Hebrew character, and one of 2 at least. I've yet to have a wander around the light, but very easy to identify this time of year. Obviously you've got a smaller range of moths, and it's about the size of a common quaker, but the giveaway identifying marks are those 2 obvious shapes on the forewings, which are said to apparently represent a character in the Hebrew alphabet. I'll have to take somebody's word for that. But common enough, a moth that you'll soon trap if you start trapping in late February and during March and April. Has quite a long and lengthy flight period, and it's a moth that we'll see a lot of over coming sessions. So that's Hebrew character. There's at least 2 of these, but there could well be a 3rd tucked away that I haven't seen yet. Well, here's another very typical early spring species, and this is a March moth. Yes, I know that it's February, but moths don't know exactly when they're meant to fly. But certainly this moth can be caught during the second half of February and onwards into April too. This isn't the best of specimens. In fact, it looks quite dark, to be honest. When you see one of these at rest during the day, and I'll put a photo in here, they can appear quite drastically different and very nicely marked, if not subtly. So that's March moth, a moth that you'll soon trap in the early part of any given year. Well, despite the at times adverse weather conditions for this evening's trapping session, you can see how breezy it is. Not very often it's breezy down here, but it is annoying when it is down here, not at the top, blowing through the tops of the trees. But we have clear skies still, and there's a bright crescent moon halfway between new and first quarter high in the sky, and that's allowed temperatures to drop. We're currently on 7 still, but moths are flying. There's a steady trickle of moths coming into the light, and amongst that trickle I had 2 engrails, which are, it seems quite early for engrails, but it probably isn't. It's probably just my memory that's fading, and I'm sure that I have recorded engrailed in February before, certainly when Dilys was alive and we used to trap in Sherwood Forest. Engrailed was a common species, as was the moth that's in here, and I'm hoping to try and get some footage of it very shortly. But this is a yellow horned. I think yellow horn's done well in Nottinghamshire in the last 20 or so years. Either it has done well and it's increased and become a bit more widespread, or it's the fact that more people are perhaps trapping earlier in the year. But it's a great moth to trap, quite variable, but it's quite well marked, quite subtle but beautifully marked. So that's a nice one to get. It was a moth that certainly wasn't on my radar when I was driving here this evening. Neither was the little chap that's tucked away in here. You may well be able to see it as it wanders its way around this container. But this is one of my favourites, and it's a moth that I haven't caught for a number of years. At least I can't remember. It might be the old memory going again. But this is Acleris cristana. It's a very nice form. It's a dark chocolate form with like a white streak that winds through it. Absolutely beautiful. But I can't risk filming it here, and because it's not a form that I don't think I've seen before, it's going home to be photographed, and then I will bring it back here tomorrow. So this is a nice one to get. I'm very pleased. It's one that just turned up, sat on top of the light as I was going around, and I was overjoyed. I do like Acleris cristana. I have very fond memories going back to the early days when my moth trapping antics involved me driving around the country lanes of Acleris into the early hours of the morning, seeing a moth fly and getting out and leaving the car running and running after it with a net. And on one particularly frosty evening, I remember, it was white over, and the only moth I saw as I was driving slowly past the Acleris meadows. I got out of the car, stopped, netted it, and it turned out to be my first Acleris cristana. I always remember that. So nice to get one of these, and hopefully it will stay still for me to photograph it in the morning and in daylight. Well, here's another pale brindled beauty. In fact, there's another one that's just turned up actually. I do love these. There seems to be smaller numbers than there were 3 weeks ago when I was last here. Despite the amount of rain that we've had here in the UK, even Nottinghamshire's had a lot of rain. I think we're all fed up with how wet it's been. These early spring flying species have certainly been able to fly. We've had some nights where we could just about have trapped with a decent enough temperature, not into double figures. Tonight did start at 10 centigrade. These moths have still been able to fly and breed, and hopefully have had a good breeding season. Well, here's that yellow horned, and you may well think, based on looking at this, what on earth was he going on about it being beautifully, if not subtly marked? But it is. They are sometimes more strongly marked than this, and other times they can be quite bland. This is sort of bordering somewhere between the two, but get a nice well marked specimen of yellow horn, and it's an absolute cracking moth. And so Dilys and I used to trap lots of these in Sherwood Forest, which of course is ancient oak woodland. So it's very nice to see this one here. This may well be my earliest ever. I will have to check on return home. But nice to get yellow-horned here at Gamston Wood. There's another yellow-horned that's just dropped in, and I think you can safely say that this one is better marked than the one we've looked at. You can really see the colour of the antenna on this particular individual. Really is a lovely moth, yellow-horned. Cracking little thing. We just had a shoulder stripe drop in actually. In fact, it landed on the camera tripod. I have got it successfully under a pot and hopefully be able to film it. It's a little bit lively at the moment. And that's a nice moth. It's one of the nicer early spring moths in my opinion. I do like shoulder stripe, and I know from last year's trapping sessions that there's a number of people that rarely, if ever, have seen shoulder stripe. So hopefully I can show you another one. Did quite well for shoulder stripe. I think they had a really good year last year, and there's another early season moth which has yet to appear yet, and that's Streamer. And Streamer is an absolute corker of a geometrid moth. But hopefully we can have a look at shoulder stripe, and that may well be the last species to come in before I intend to pack up at 2000 hours. I think 2 hours will be plenty, despite these at times slightly adverse conditions. I've done very well, at least I think so. I'm happy with the species that I've got and the number of moths that I've got too. So hopefully before we finish I can get to film shoulder stripe and show you that, because it's an absolute beauty. Just like this D, which would be more beautiful if it had got a tot of whiskey in it. Tea's awful out of a flask.